Hey everybody, and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about an excerpt from one of my all-time favorite symphonies, Mozart's 40th Symphony. Now, if you are in high school and you live in Nebraska like I do, then this is actually going to be on your all-state audition list, so hopefully this video will give you some ideas on how you can prepare for that. For anybody else, this is one that appears on pretty much every audition that I've seen for professional orchestras, so it's going to be one that you'll want to be practicing anyway. Now, for this video, I'm not going to be giving you like a step-by-step tutorial on how to play the notes necessarily, but I will include a fingering and some relevant bowings in the description below, so be sure to check that out. So when you take this excerpt into an audition, what are the panels actually looking for? I'll start by talking about a few key areas that I want you to be aware of when you're practicing, and then we'll go into further detail on those in a minute. So the first thing is going to be the stroke. The stroke needs to be off the string, needs to be resonant in between the strokes, and you don't want it to sound overworked or overplayed in any way. I feel like it should sound nice and present, and maybe even a touch aggressive, but without being ugly or rough in any way. This is Mozart after all, and we want it to sound like the peak of elegance. The second thing is going to be directional phrasing that follows the shape of the line. So following the rise and the fall of the line with dynamics can help shape things to make it sound more musical, give it direction, and propel the music forward. The last thing is going to be question and answer phrasing. And I'll go into more detail on that in a minute, but those are just a few of the things sort of at a glance. Now, let's take a look at each of those things in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the stroke. Yes, it's an off stroke. I think it's really important to define what that is and what it isn't. In my opinion, an off stroke is not simply bouncing the bow off of the string. When you do that, you get a little bit of attack at the front of the note, but no body to it. On the other side of things, it's definitely not on the string, because that would sound very heavy, inelegant, and not very Mozart at all. Rather than thinking specifically about the bow stroke being off the string, instead I like to think about my balance between attack, sustain, and release in order to get the sound that I'm looking for. I'll go further into detail on this concept as it relates to bow strokes as a whole in a future video, so be sure to get subscribed so you won't miss it. Suffice it to say, for Mozart, we're going to want a clear attack, a short sustain, and a tapered release. Here's what I mean by that. The attack is going to be the activation of the note. The sustain is going to be how much time the bow spends on the string. And then the release is going to be the resonance afterwards. The taper in the release is going to be accomplished with how the bow is lifted from the string after the sustain period. I recommend practicing the attack, sustain, and release at the frog, as well as at the tip, and also at the balance point. For anyone unfamiliar, I have a bow right here. And it's going to be that place where your bow just simply balances. You can practice this exercise on scales as well as slowly on the passage itself. Here's an example of what I mean. So again, it's the combination of clear attack, short sustain, and especially that tapered release that are going to give the stroke the character that we're looking for. So we have an excerpt here with some really clear direction in the eighth note passages. As a general rule, I like to follow these shapes with my dynamics. This is going to help to really propel the passage forward and give it some musical interest. So, in other words, slightly louder when the phrase rises and slightly softer when the phrase lowers. One good way that you can practice this is to exaggerate the difference between loud and soft when you're playing it slowly. Then when you go to play it faster, since you've told your hands exactly what you want them to do, they'll know and respond accordingly. To add the icing on the cake of this excerpt, we need to consider a different level of phrasing. I consider the following the line thing I mentioned just a minute ago as an overall concept, but this is a little bit more specific than that. Let's take a look at the opening statement here. Where does this phrase go? Be careful when you answer, because you might be tempted to say that it goes for the highest note in the phrase, the top G, but that's actually going to upset the balance of the phrase if we do that. What I mean is that those first two bars create what we call a question phrase, with the notes following that being the corresponding answer. This kind of phrase structure is quite common, especially in classical era music like Mozart, so we need to be sure that we have a convincing end to the question phrase. It can be tempting to overplay that high G, but we want to give it an elegant taper instead. So, how do we put all these things into a convincing performance of the excerpt? Here are a few additional strategies that you can try on the things I mentioned earlier. For the stroke, try practicing 3 bow strokes per note on the eighth note passages. This will help you to get a good feel on the stroke while having a slower left hand, which is going to help the left and the right hands talk to each other much better. Then, when you're comfortable with that, take that down to 2 bow strokes per note, and then try playing as written. For the directional phrasing, like I mentioned earlier, practice it slowly and exaggerate the dynamics so that they follow the line, and then it's going to be much easier when you go to play it faster. For the question and answer phrase, in addition to exaggerating the effect when you practice slowly, like we did with the following the line phrasing, you might also try working with just the last 2 notes of that question phrase. So in the example we mentioned earlier, that's going to be the B to the G. Get that to sound the way you want it to with that nice taper on it. Then we're going to work to expand out in either direction. So adding a note behind it, getting comfortable with that, adding another note behind that, etc. You can get creative with this and expand backwards until it feels comfortable, and then forward, or some combination of both. Well guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you found it useful as a way to break down an excerpt into its important parts like this to create a strong overall presentation, as well as some effective means to practice these elements. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more bass content. My next video is going to be a similar tutorial video on the Brahms 2 excerpt at rehearsal letter E, which also happens to be on the Nebraska All-State audition. Feel free to comment down below if there's a topic you'd like to hear about. I have a good number of ideas in the queue right now, but I'm always curious about what you guys want to know more about. Also, if you're interested in lessons, I teach online. I'll leave a link to my website in the description below. Head on over there and send me a note through the contact page, and we'll see about getting things set up. Be sure to let me know that this video sent you. Your first lesson is free if you're referred from this video. As always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, happy practicing.